Good evening and welcome to this meeting of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council's Audit and Governance Committee. A very warm welcome to members of the committee and to the officers who are present, and also to those who are online for this evening's meeting. I'll go through the formalities of the meeting first, and I'll ask Mr. Hanton from Democratic Services to take us through the housekeeping rules and to deal with items 2 and 3 on the agenda. Mr. Hanton.
Good evening. Please note that this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee is being recorded by the Council and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Any councillors or officers not in the room and wishing to speak are asked to please use the raise your hand feature and to switch on your video when invited to speak. Please could members in the room only speak when invited to by the chairman and mute their microphones when not speaking. And finally, please also ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you. And then, Chairman, I'll go through item 1 as well, if that's okay. We haven't received any apologies for tonight's meeting. Councillor Cox and Councillor Filer, who are members of the committee, are attending the meeting virtually, but which means that if we do have to have a vote, they won't be able to be included in the vote. And finally, Chairman, Councillor Butt has informed us that he's been delayed in traffic and will be joining us as soon as he possibly can. So moving on to item 2, there are no substitutes for tonight's meeting. And then moving on to item 3, Chairman, it's the opportunity to invite any members with any interests to make their declarations.
There don't appear to be any, Mr. Hanton. So could I take us on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the confirmation of the meeting held on the 1st of December 2022. Could I have your confirmation that these are a true and accurate record of that meeting? Can that be agreed? Thank you very much indeed, members.
I can't agree or disagree, as I was not present at that meeting.
I should have said those who were present, but thank you for pointing that out, Councillor Brooke. That takes us on to item 5, public issues. Mr. Hanton.
Chairman, there are no public issues.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Councillor Butt. Your apologies for lateness have been already recorded, and I'm glad you made it through the traffic. And a warm welcome also to Councillor Cox and Councillor Filer online. Where there are member comments during the course of the meeting or questions to be asked, as you know, I will go to those who are in the room first, and I'll come to you as the 2 members online following that. But I will make sure I come to you. You won't be missed. So it takes us on to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is item 6, which is the audit progress and sector update from the external auditor. We have Peter Barber, who's partner at Grant Thornton, our external auditors, online with us. And I will ask you, Mr. Barber, to introduce your report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. Item 6 on the agenda is our progress report and sector update, setting out the position against both the 2021 audit as well as 21-22. If we start with 2021, the position as of last week is summarised on page 18 of your papers. In terms of the opinion audit, you will see that the main 2 areas outstanding remain infrastructure and IS 19. For infrastructure, which you will know from previous updates is a national issue affecting all large councils, we now have the statutory instrument that provides us with a way forward. Interestingly, the final piece of the jigsaw, which was the supplementary SIPFA guidance that was outstanding at the time of writing my report, was issued yesterday, which is good news. And that SIPFA guidance is being supplemented with a webinar that's being held next week. I think it's on the 17th of January to support local authorities, finance officers with the implementation of the changes that need to be made to those accounts to reflect that statutory instrument, and also provide those wishing to do so to raise questions on its application. So this is positive, and it should now allow councils, including BCP, to make the changes necessary to the financial statements in this respect to comply with the new guidance and avoid a qualification. An important part of that is that as part of the SIPFA guidance, and I've only had a quick read through it, councils will need to demonstrate that their useful lives for their different types of infrastructure assets are within the ranges set out in the SIPFA guidance. They're quite broad, but if you are outside of those ranges, then clearly there will be further work and explanations required. And on the back of that, we are now continuing to liaise with officers to progress in this area. The second area is the IS 19 pension liability. And in respect to this area, the council, and we continue to speak with finance officers, are liaising with both the Dorset Pension Fund and the actuaries to have obtained a revised net liability position at the 31st of March 2021 that reflects the errors that were found in the Dorset Pension Fund accounts by their auditors. And obviously, once officers have received that, they can then consider whether there is an impact, material or otherwise, on the statements, and will in turn decide whether any figures need restating. And obviously, we will need to review that updated note to make sure we're happy with that. As set out previously by the chair of this committee at earlier meetings of the committee, we do continue to have a large number of meetings, both with officers but also with the chair of this committee, to discuss progress, to make sure everybody's up to date. The last meeting with officers and the chair took place last week, and those meetings are essentially aimed at ensuring all possible actions are being taken to complete the work as soon as possible, recognising absolutely everybody is desperate that this work is completed as soon as possible. So there is still a bit of work to do, but we have, I think, a clearer way forward than we did last time, and we continue to work to get that work completed, hopefully by the end of this month. So that is the last element of 2021, but obviously we're also focused on 21-22. You'll recall back in the meeting of this committee back in October, actually my audit manager, Mark Bartlett, presented the 21-22 audit plan, setting our approach to discharging our responsibilities. We commenced actually the post-statements audit shortly after that meeting in November, and up until probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, just before Christmas, that was progressing very well. Steady progress, recognising the complexity of the accounts at BCP, and clearly your finance team facing lots of competing priorities. Our work did highlight a number of areas where some of the issues that had been picked up as part of the 2021 audit had reappeared, but we were progressing. And then probably about the middle of December, Mark Bartlett, the incumbent manager, who you met at the October meeting, resigned. He is leaving Grant Thornton. His last day is actually today, and he is joining another public sector audit firm. Interestingly, one of the new entrants that has been recently appointed by public sector audit appointments for audits commencing 2024-25. So this is a real blow for us. and at present, we do not have an immediate solution to replacing the manager. We have lots of managers, but we need to allocate those with the most experience to the most complex audits, and that is the case at BCP. And we do not have any readily available who are not fully occupied. So we have reluctantly, as a firm, taken the decision to pause the 21-22 post-status audit until a appropriate replacement is secured. And this is driven, in the main, well, exclusively by quality and ensuring that that's not compromised. All our other managers, including those that we would potentially move across, have a full portfolio of NHS and local government audits, and to take them off would adversely affect those audits underway. So until a permanent replacement is found, we are not in a position, unfortunately, to continue and provide an indicative target for completion. What I can say is that the very latest that we could recommence, obviously subject to this being agreed with finance officers, recognising their other commitments, would be the end of June 2023. But I very much hope, but I can't promise that it would be earlier than then. Probably just a couple of other areas to mention before I open up to questions. Objections and communications from members of the public. I continue to receive quite a bit, actually, of communication from the public regarding various aspects of the council's finances. My remit is strictly limited, but I do consider each of those in terms of my responsibilities. And where appropriate, I do discuss these with officers to inform any response. We have accepted some of them and followed them through, particularly in relation to 2021 that I've reported on previously. And where appropriate, I do consider those observations as part of my ongoing audit. And there are a number of things that have been brought to my attention that I will consider as part of 21-22 once it's back up and running. And where appropriate, we will report on those in the normal manner in due course. It's probably important also to say that the value for money for 21-22, recognising 2021 was issued back in October. The value for money work is to start shortly, and this is not held up by the departure of the manager. Mark Bartlett, we do have a member of our advisory team who is commencing that work in the next week or so for 21-22. And that initially will focus probably exclusively on the financial sustainability criteria, given our reporting last year, with a particular focus, I suspect, over the next 3 or 4 weeks on the forthcoming budget for 23-24, the budget setting round, with a real focus really on us and the council, but the council being able to say, firstly, demonstrate that the budget for 23-24 is realistic and achievable, based on robust evidence, particularly to support the key assumptions, and us being provided with evidence to satisfy ourselves in that area, with the remainder, subject to that proving satisfactory, the remainder of the areas being covered with a target completion date for that work, probably of July this year, which would be earlier than the equivalent last year. The rest of the report does provide some sector updates. Chair, I wasn't minded to go through that, but I am happy to take any questions on the report itself or the sector update for that matter.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Barber. Before we do, I'm going to invite our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Richins, for any comments he might want to make, most particularly around the subject matter of our call last Thursday and the pausing of the 2021-22 audit and the implications from that because we obviously had a long discussion last Thursday on just that topic, as well as all the other issues that you have been speaking to us about this evening. Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Chair. And it's probably best to start by just thanking the external auditor for his continued support to this authority with regards to the many challenges from creating a new unitary authority post LGR, which I thank him personally for as part of that ongoing process. Clearly, the matters set out in this report is something with regards to the pausing of the 21-22 audit that will cause this council concern. As you quite rightly point out, yourself, as the chair of Audit and Governance Committee himself, have met with Pete Barber to discuss this very issue. Clearly, there's going to be a need to be an element of pragmatism around when the audit is restarted, because as Pete quite rightly points out, the finance team under a lot of pressure at this moment in time, because we are trying to drive through and deliver a new ERP system and a new finance system as part of that, which is clearly going to be a key priority on which the council is reliant for the delivery of significant savings and improvements in service standards going forward. So that will be a key issue. In regards to responding to that, I think there was a suggestion that I made at that meeting where perhaps I will write to the PSAA and highlight the concerns being created by, it's good to see new entrants into the market, but they're taking capacity out. They're taking capacity out now when those new firms won't be required to do audits until the 22-23 audits. So it's quite a long way into the future before they actually need to do that. So taking out capacity now, which will cause us and a number of other local authorities significant issues where their auditors present them with the same kind of challenge that we've got at this moment in time. So I think there's an action on me to write that letter in due course.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Richards. That's extremely helpful. So, members, do you have any questions for our external auditors? Councillor Phipps.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just wanted to ask about the section, the bit about objection to the accounts. And obviously, like we heard, that you do get quite a lot of correspondence and people getting in touch with you. There are two specifically mentioned on there, and one of those is actually mentioned at full council the other night, the Bayside. I just wondered how, and the other one, of course, is the bounce back, which there's been a lot of public interest in. And I know that's one of the criteria as well for this committee, is things that are of public interest that we have a look at. So what I want to know really is how when you get these objections and comments, how far do you actually delve into these? Because you've actually said on the Bayside, it's a matter brought to attention. So is that it? Okay, thanks, we've had a look at that. Never mind, it's brushed under the carpet. Or do you actually do any delving into what's actually happened, ask some questions of the council, that type of thing? Because I am aware that that one made a significant loss. And I don't believe there's a business case for it either. Then we've got the bounce back, of course, and that has, well, there's been a lot of interest in that, and not only the issues that I have raised, but across the board. And there was a question on it at full council on one of the issues, a statement made and a question as well about one of the grants in particular that was raised from 15 to 70,000 when 80% of the tickets were already been sold, things like that. So I'd like to know how far you go into this, or is it just something you look at it and thought, oh well, okay, we've noted that, thank you very much. Thanks.
Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I suppose it's important to explain that my role in outside of the public sector, the role of the auditor is purely to give an opinion on the financial statements, to confirm or otherwise that they present a true and fair position. So when it comes to the opinion, I am interested in whether this expenditure, in the case of this, is properly recorded, and that's the extent of the role for the opinion. But I also have a responsibility in terms of value for money and the legality of transactions, and that's probably more where it comes into. But in terms of my value for money role, value for money means lots of things to lots of different people, but I am driven by the NAO code on value for money, which is about sustainability, governance, and the 3 E's. And therefore, on the Bayside restaurant, I've been made aware of this expenditure. And apologies, I'm just trying to off the top of my head now remember when the expenditure was incurred, but my recollection is that it's absolutely 21-22, and obviously doesn't affect 2021, and therefore, in order for me to be able to consider that, one, whoever's raising it with me has to do it within a window that is made available every year following the production of the draft accounts. In this case, that wasn't brought to my attention during that period, but nonetheless, I have responded to say I will have regard to it. It doesn't mean that I will necessarily look at it, and I will need to make that judgment as part of the overall approach that I adopt once we reconvene that audit. And in terms of the bounce back challenge funding, it's a similar thing really, but in terms of my remit, it is strictly limited, and I may consider it, but I haven't as yet reached a confirmed position on that at this moment. What I look to do is make sure that officers are cited, because clearly if people have concerns about the way the council operates, because anything like this I look at, it incurs my time, my team's time, and there is a cost associated with it. So, there are lots of mechanisms for individuals to raise concerns with the council, and what we seek to do ideally is have these resolved through communication between the individual and the council. And really, the auditor is the last resort, recognising the limitations of my role.
Do you need to come back, Councillor?
No, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your answer.
Councillor Brooke.
Right. Thank you, Chair. In his presentation, Mr. Barber made reference to some of the difficulties in achieving a balanced budget for 23-24 and obviously subsequently 24-25. In the written report, there is reference to approaching 60 councils at risk of running out of money next year. The 23-24 budget that we've seen so far is predicated on a significant number of risks, including several £1 million to be found from unidentified savings. My question relating to that really is, where does BCP Council fit into the scenario? Is it one of those 60 that you refer to, or is it outside that and potentially safe?
Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. I do not know, if I'm honest, whether BCP is one of those 60. I know it's done based on an analysis of submissions by councils across the country and looking at projections of changes in demand and unit costs. I suspect that to varying degrees, every upper tier council has a huge challenge ahead of them into the medium term. It is really a perfect storm of, continued austerity, limited increases in funding, ever increasing expectations of the public, particularly with the financial squeeze that individuals are under, and costs increasing, just even the utilities and the cost that can be on some councils, along with some of the pay increases that have not, that have not been fully funded. So, I do believe that BCP has a very challenging financial position going forward, and only by ensuring that the budget is, the budget will be stretching, but that there is appropriate assumptions to underpin it, that there is, without that, there is real concern on my part about the delivery of a balanced budget into the medium term. and that was reflected in my reporting via the auditor's annual report last October.
Councillor Brooke, are you?
I'm happy with that response, yes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Howell?
Hello. I've just got a question which has occurred to me this week in other circumstances that I think hopefully you'd be able to answer. The council MTFP is currently predicated on taking maximum council tax. And I just wonder if that is considered to be an advisable way of proceeding, because it does mean that there's no scope for increasing the assumption further, because you're taking maximum council tax already. And so I'm just wondering about whether that is a sensible strategy. Thank you.
Mr. Barber?
It is not for me to comment on decision making by the council in terms of the methods of funding its budget. That is a decision for the council to make based on complete and accurate information provided to decision makers. All I can comment on is if I as a result of any decision in relation to budget setting, that I've got concerns about the financial sustainability and and clearly, if council tax is not being increased to the maximum, then you would need to ensure that there is a alternative that plugs any increased gap.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Howell?
Yeah, I mean, I just say, I mean, it's not, it's just an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously if you want to, and I'm not speaking here with any thought as to whether it's the right thing to do or not, or with any political spin or anything. It's just from a management perspective, if you go for the maximum, then you are maximising the amount of revenue you generate, and therefore the services that you can deliver as a council, but you are increasing the potential for you not being able to deliver your plan, presumably, especially in an inflationary environment. But yeah, I'm not expecting you to comment on that. Thank you.
If there are no other members in the room, I'll go to Councillor Cox. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say I'm absolutely quite flabbergasted that that the audit has been paused. That seems to have a complete lack of respect and priority for BCP when it comes to Grant Thornton. I do know a thing or two about audits, as I've got about 60 odd myself, and I have never ever paused an audit because a manager has resigned, so it seems absolutely extraordinary that this has happened. I mean, I've got various questions on this. One is, how much notice does a manager have to give? Because it seems to be less than a month from what you've just commented. Surely it's 3 months, and surely there are alternatives, whether it's going to an agency and getting temps, getting subcontractors, or even going to this new competitor and saying, hang on a minute, we need this guy. He was part of our team. Can we subcontract him from you so we can finish our obligations? It's as I said, I'm flabbergasted that you can't in your arrangements, you can't expand what you've got to take into account the workload that he has. Presumably, we're not the only council. Are we the only council that you've had to pause? Is there other councils that or NHS organisations that you're having to pause because of this? Well, there's a few questions to start off with, but I just wanted to also comment on the Bay side, which has already been talked about. It seems fundamental to me, and you've already mentioned it, that governance is at the heart of what you do. It's absolutely fundamental, and actually it's governance. And if you need to look at, well, in my opinion, you need to look at these failures that have taken place, because underneath it there is a governance issue, and I've already shall we say we've already had words between us about your opinion on governance at BCP. In my opinion, governance is appalling. You've given it a clean sheet so far, but actually governance is absolutely fundamental to the audit process, and actually it's falling down left, right, and centre. And this would be a typical example. In Bayside, it's not the fact that they've lost lots of money, it's the fact that somebody has overridden a recommendation to give them the money in the first place. And just like, you know, in any audit you do, whether it's a public sector or a private sector, if somebody has the ability to override a recommendation or a control, that's a fundamental failure of governance. And therefore you should be very interested in that, I would suggest. Anyway, I've had enough. Said enough.
So, Mr. Barber, there are two distinctly different sets of questions then from Councillor Cox. I leave it to you in which order you address them. But the first one over the resignation of the audit manager is one that Mr. Richards and I explored with you in quite some detail. Not necessarily from exactly the same position that Councillor Cox is coming from, but much more about how we can address the issue to unpause the audit, given the situation we've experienced for 2020-21, as well as 21-22. But please, could you answer Councillor Cox's two sets of questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll try not to get too emotive here, but you know, I do probably need to put on record that I do take offence to the reference to lack of respect. I fundamentally, as you would expect, Councillor Cox to disagree with that observation. Far from it. In fact, the respect is in relation to the critical element of maintaining quality. You wouldn't expect me to talk about the notice period for an individual's employment. That is between the individual and GT. There are a whole raft of routes that we're looking at to fill vacancies, but we want to make sure we get the right people. I would love it if I could go into an agency and pick up somebody who I could bring in to manage BCP Council, but I'm absolutely sure that they don't exist in any agency, and they require a very specific skill set, and as a result, we don't have that individual yet. But rest assured, I am absolutely trying my damnedest to find somebody to do that, and we're working very hard. There needs to be a recognition, I think, and I think I referred to it in my report, that, you know, only 12% of 2021 audits were signed by the deadline. So 21-22 were signed by the deadline, so less than 1 in 8, and it just reflects the really challenging external audit market in the public sector, and for that matter commercially, where the quantum of work required to discharge our responsibilities has increased exponentially. That's been reflected in fees, and the availability of people to make up that increased resource has not matched that. We have been bringing people from overseas in recent years to fill some of that gap, but it's not gone all the way. And we do not, as you would expect, have anybody sitting there on the sidelines should an individual resign that can step into that. They are all absolutely working flat out. So I will continue to proceed with trying to find a replacement, and as soon as I do, I will ensure that everybody is advised accordingly, and hopefully that will fit in with the council in terms of their availability. And on the Bay side, you know, I will just reiterate what I said. I've had communication, I've considered it, and I've responded accordingly. If I were to look at every single thing I got, which is significant, you know, the audit process would be absolutely never ending, and there are a number of other mechanisms that should be effective individually or cumulatively, internally and externally, that should ensure that the council operates and decisions are made in the right way. And I will focus on the most significant that fit in with my role in terms of when I get involved.
Councillor Cox, did you have any further questions?
It's not necessarily further questions, but I just want to come back on something that you said. Obviously, we'll disagree on the respect issue, but I'm not asking for the details of the individual's notice period. I'm actually interested in the whole of Grant Thornton. Do your managers have 3 months notice? I don't think that's an unreasonable question to ask, because actually it's not necessarily for this audit, but maybe for future audits. You know, if we're going to have audits suspended because you lose staff on a regular basis, then that's an important aspect to take into account. And as I've said before, I'm flabbergasted that you didn't answer the question about how many other councils are being paused as well. You know, I find it unacceptable personally, and I think the council should find it unacceptable. I do have another question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, and that was to do with the infrastructure accounting policy. I don't actually know what has been agreed in terms of infrastructure. What are you actually going to do, or what is the council going to do in terms of infrastructure? Are we changing the values of the assets that we've got? Is that part of the process? Are we going to depreciate them where we didn't depreciate them before? Are we going to depreciate them differently? I'd be quite interested to know what that change will be. And in respect of the comment about the 60 councils that are facing a cash crisis, I don't expect that BCP are in the 60, because actually we've already run out of cash, and that's why we've had to go to the government with a begging bowl for £20 million. So I suspect we're well past the 60 that are at risk. We're already there. But anyway, that's just a comment. Thank you.
Mr. Barber.
Okay, so no, I'm not going to comment on the notice period for any of our employees. That's not something that should form part of the discussion this evening, in my view. So I won't be responding to that. You're absolutely right. Within your questions, I did overlook the other councils impacted, and there are a number of councils impacted, both locally and nationally, due to a number of departures as a result of a number of individuals going or having already gone to some of the new entrants into the market. And you know, I note Mr. Richins' observation about writing to public sector audit appointments, who ultimately appoint us to BCP, and that's who we had the contract with. You know, recognizing that is having, you know, that does have an impact on us. You know, and we've raised our concerns about that to PSAA as well. And then in terms of the infrastructure, it is for the council to interpret the guidance that's emerged. You know, clearly we do have discussions with officers. The council will have to consider that guidance and decide what changes need to be made to ensure that the infrastructure disclosures in the accounts are compliant with the new SI, and for us to review and audit that. You know, there is a clear separation there. You consider the guidance, you make the changes, and we audit it. But essentially, it's removing the gross infrastructure disclosures in the accounts and leaving the net position in the note, which is also reflected in the primary statement, the balance sheet.
Thank you, members. If there are no more questions, I've got a couple of comments to make. First and foremost, from a pragmatic point of view, one of the things that I'm concerned about is to build on what you've already said, Mr. Barber, concerning you using best endeavours to replace the audit manager, and the comments that both Mr. Richards and I made in our call with you last week about how you will be going about that, and indeed to make sure that we are front and centre your top priority, because we are already at a disadvantage perhaps from 2021, and we want to make sure that doesn't get worse before you are able to make it better. So I appreciate, I think, the members of the committee a little bit more of endorsement of that approach, and that other authorities won't get even further ahead of us in terms of your prioritisation as a result. Could you make those comments in the way that we discussed last week, please?
Happy to do that, Chair. And there will be no new audit starting where there is a appropriately skilled manager that could be undertaking Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. With remote audit, we like to have some presence on site, but we are not restricted like we used to be, dare I say, by geography. So from my perspective, I am absolutely desperate to find somebody to conclude this, because I am equally frustrated by the fact that we haven't signed this off, and I'm under pressure to sign off this audit, and for that matter a number of other audits that I do at the moment that are also paused and don't have a particular individual at a certain grade. So, Chair, I'm more than happy to put on record that I am doing what I can, and I've absolutely communicated to my superiors the importance of securing somebody as soon as possible.
So I'll come back to my other point in a moment as I lead us into the recommendation, because it's relevant to that. In the meantime, Councillor Anne Filer, you've indicated online. Could you?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Evening, Mr. Barber. It's not often that I completely agree with Councillor Cox, but on this occasion, I'm absolutely flabbergasted. I think his term "lack of respect" was too strong, but I certainly think it's lack of prioritisation, and it also reflects badly on any public perception of us that we are the ones who are going to be paused. It's just not good enough. Grant Thornton's a huge organisation. This went out for a bid. You bid for the audit. You've got it. Why are we the ones who are being paused in your list of prioritisations? I would like to think that we're your priority. From our point of view, all of us on this committee, we are the priority, and we should be. And I see your pain. I feel your pain, but that doesn't help us. And in an election year particularly, it certainly doesn't help us. And I think that, all your best efforts and speaking to your superiors and asking for urgent help in the managerial department just is not satisfactory. It doesn't satisfy me as a member of this committee and as a member of this council. And I think it will fit badly with our residents, after all, whom we're all serving, you and us. So I hear that Councillor Beasley and Mr. Richards have both been having conversations with you, and whatever they've said, I completely and utterly agree 100%, and Mike Cox, and with you. Thank you.
So, Mr. Barber, could you address the issues that Councillor Filer's just raised? I know they may be in sense repetitious, but I think they do need to have further endorsement from you as to the way forward.
I'm not sure what else I can say, really. I mean, the reason why BCP are effective is because an individual has left who had a portfolio of audits that included BCP. If another individual had left, another manager, who had another portfolio, then you wouldn't be affected. And as I've set out in my report, we would not be looking to remove anybody from any ongoing audits where there is a full team in place, because of the knock-on effects on those audits. And all our audits that were allocated, or 200, are our priorities. So we had 200 audits, more or less, in the current contract, and they are all our priorities. And I'm sure public sector audits appointment would not want us to be prioritising audits in the way that was suggested, that dare I say, we move people off one audit to the benefit of another, and we don't think that's right. And I stand by what I said, which is that I am doing everything I can to find a replacement, but the country is not awash with people that have the right skill set and are available to fill those posts. And as a result, my priority has to be a safe audit opinion, which I think would be compromised if we continued without a manager.
So I don't think you want to come back to you, Councillor Filer.
No, Chairman, thank you very much.
So before we go to the recommendation, which is for noting, you will see from the A&G forward plan that the statement of accounts is on there with Grant Thornton again. So, Mr. Barber, we will look forward to seeing you at our meeting on the 16th of February. But in the meantime, I think it would be perfectly reasonable for me to ask you to keep in close touch with myself and the Chief Financial Officer. If we deem it necessary to have another online meeting with you over any of this area, then please could we try to arrange that. The 16th of February is a month or so away. I think it would be helpful actually if at the very least in the interim, halfway through that period, we get some kind of update from you. And if you think it's appropriate for that update to be circulated to members of the committee in preparation for our meeting on the 16th of February, then certainly we'll comply with that. What I want to do is to reassure the committee that this has had active engagement both from Mr. Richards and from myself, not just with the meeting we had last week, but in previous meetings, and we will continue to do so. And I hope that we can do that and come to probably more positive ground at our next meeting. And of course, if we can't, then that will go over into our further meeting on the 9th of March, and I'll endeavour to facilitate the same process with Grant Thornton and with the Chief Financial Officer as we have up till now. I'm sure that meets with the approval of the committee. I doubt it would be otherwise. So members, the recommendation is that Audit and Governance Committee notes the external auditor's progress to date in delivering their responsibilities and the sector update provided. Can we agree at the very least that we so note, members? That is agreed. So Mr. Barber, thank you very much indeed for your input to Audit and Governance this evening. No doubt you and I and Mr. Richards will be meeting before the next meeting of the committee, but the committee will look forward to your update on the 16th of February. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
So members, that takes us on to item 7 on the agenda, which is Treasury Management Monitoring Report for the period April to December 2022 and the Treasury Management Strategy for 2023-24. We have Matthew Filmer, the Assistant Chief Financial Officer, on the line on the meeting. And I wonder, Mr. Filmer, if you could introduce your report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Audit and Governance Committee. So the report begins with the usual economic update. For the most noteworthy point to pick out is back in December last year, the Bank of England increased the base rate again from 3% to 3.5%. We are starting to see a bit of a slowdown on inflation, but it's still running very high, well above the 2% target that the Bank of England look to maintain. We're seeing a likelihood that rates will go up again when Bank of England meet in February by potentially another 0.25%. And you'll see on table 1 of the report, the Treasury Management Advisor's forecasts, that we're likely to see a peak of around 4.5% by December this year. So table 2 of the report just sets out the Treasury Management function budgetary position, and we're currently forecasting a surplus just shy of £2 million. And this reflects the higher investment income due to those increasing interest rates. And table 3 and table 4 set out the debt and investment positions as at the end of December, but there's no real noteworthy changes to highlight to the committee. So the second part of the report introduces the Treasury Management Strategy for 23-24, as well as the Treasury Management Policies and Practices, and that's both of those on Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 to the covering report. The key document is the strategy, which we review and get approved every year by yourselves as committee, and then it's put to full council as part of the budget setting process. It's a key document because it sets out how the Treasury Management function supports capital investment of the council, and it includes a number of key prudential indicators which sets limits on items such as borrowing, how much we borrow and from whom, and also in terms of who we invest with and for how much and for how long. So before I just mention the changes for the Treasury Management Strategy, I just wanted to highlight the amendment that was sent round this morning by Mr. Hanton. We've had to change page 48 of the report pack. This was an oversight on my part, and apologies. We've had to update the debt caps for the operational and authorised limit. These are the exact same numbers that were approved by the committee back in July and have subsequently been ratified by council. So they're not new figures. They've been scrutinised previously, but they oversight on my part. They didn't meet the new strategy. So there's an update that was sent around this morning. So moving to the Treasury Management Strategy updates for 23-24. This is the first year that we've had to comply with SIPFA's revised Treasury Management Code and Prudential Code, and there are a number of changes to highlight with that. I have been highlighting the Prudential Code changes for a number of meetings now, and this is all around effectively banning commercial investments from councils. So just stopping commercial investments and councils borrowing in advance of need. So a lot of that's already been built into the strategy last year, but it effectively finalises it for the 23-24 year. In regards to the Treasury Management Code updates, there's an introduction of a new prudential indicator, which is referred to as the liability benchmark, and you'll see that on pages 63 and 64 of your report pack. There's 2 graphs there, one for the general fund and one for the HRA. And it's not perhaps the easiest of understood graphs, but what it tries to do is show a comparison of the council's existing loan portfolio and compares that with the committed borrowing needs. And what both graphs illustrate for this council is that we will need to carry out more borrowing, actual borrowing, to meet our past liabilities, but also future liabilities that are built into the council's capital programme. Another change is in regards to more emphasis on improving the knowledge and skills of officers and members involved in Treasury management. So what I will be looking to do in the new financial year is send a questionnaire to committee members to understand their knowledge and skills on Treasury management, and then look to have a tailored training session perhaps next year to try and boost the knowledge of this committee so that there's effective scrutiny of future reports. The reports at the moment are done on a quarterly basis to this committee, but what you'll see going forward is I'll be including more forward-looking prudential indicators. So normally we bring those to the committee once a year as part of the strategy. You'll be seeing those on a quarterly basis going forward. So again, the training will be important for you to then understand those indicators that are brought forward. And lastly, there's now inclusion of reference to around environmental, social and governance issues within our policies and practices. It's an area that's growing within the Treasury management field, so it's been recognised, but there's more work to do as officers and the committee to put practices in place. So I'll stop there, Chair, and happily take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Filmer, and thank you for the supplementary amendment that was circulated earlier. So, members, questions for Mr. Filmer? No questions in the room. Are you indicating, Councillor Cox? Because the monitor comes up and goes away, so I'm not sure. It is up now. Councillor Cox.
Sorry, I just realised I pressed like rather than the hand up. So I was just it was, well, there's two comments really. One was in terms of the long-term interest rates. I had heard that the long-term interest rates were on their way down, and so I just wouldn't mind Matthew's comment on that, because that's what I heard from a client. And the other one was obviously was in terms of the amended paragraph, which obviously I disagree with and disagreed with before and disagreed with at council. So I would like it on record that I also disagree with it on this as well. So that was those are the only two comments.
Mr. Filmer.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So in regards to interest rates, we work with a number of brokers, and they effectively they take a reading in regard to the market, and they're able to provide us almost like a level of expectation whether rates will increase or decrease. And so the current expectation, and this was this morning from one of our brokers, that there's likelihood of an 80% likelihood that interest rates will go up in February by 0.25%. It's a 40% likelihood that it will be 0.5%. So we use that intelligence to sort of make those forecasts on interest rates alongside the work that our treasury management advisors do. So that's that.
So I was talking about long-term rates rather than relatively.
Oh yes,
short-term.
yes.
So about 5 years rather than.
Yeah. So if you look at table 1 in the report, we see a peak at December at 4.5%, and then the latter quarters it then does start to reduce. So we're likely to see a peak by December this year, and then the expectation is interest rates will drop. Yes.
And is that expectation is getting more and more? Or
yeah, yes, yeah.
Do you have anything else, Councillor Cox? No. Very well, members. Can I therefore go, Councillor Phipps?
I was just going to come back to the page, obviously, that was substituted because it was incorrect the first time. And obviously, it does have on there the authorised limit, the borrowing limit, that actually I voted against at this committee, and I voted against in council, and we're being actually asked to approve it. So I'm just considering whether really I ought to abstain on that one rather than actually approve something that I voted against twice. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Well, I will take the two recommendations separately, so that will give you an opportunity to vote as you wish. But of course, it will only be those in the room who are entitled to vote. So, members, that takes us to the recommendations, and as I say, I'll do them separately. The first recommendation is for noting to note the reported activity of the Treasury Management function for the period ending 31st of December 2022. And in so noting, I think we should thank Mr. Filmer and his team for the work that they're doing in what are quite challenging circumstances in terms of Treasury management after a period of constantly very low interest rates. So if you're with your agreement, members, if we are agreed to note, could we add that comment into the minutes? Is that agreed? Thank you very much. And the second recommendation is to approve the Treasury Management Strategy 2023-24 and the Treasury Management Policy, Practices and Schedules included in Appendix 1 and 2. And on this item, I will take a vote. So all those in favour of that recommendation, please indicate. Those against, please indicate. And I assume, therefore, that There are 3 abstentions. Could you note that, please, Mr. Hampton? Thank you very much. And thank you again, Mr. Filmer, for the work that you've undertaken on behalf of the Council and for this committee. Thank you very much. Members, that takes us on to item 8 on the agenda, which is Risk Management Corporate Risk Register update. Unfortunately, Fiona Manton is unwell and can't be with us this evening, so in her place, Mr. Stannard will be presenting the risk management report. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, committee. So yes, quarterly update of the risk register. First of all, I just wanted to reiterate that although this is a quarterly update, please be assured that the Corporate Management Board and the Director Strategy Group are considering risks on a weekly basis. Now the Chief Executive has instigated an agenda item on all of those meetings. So consequently, it's quite difficult to condense those discussions into a report on a quarterly basis for you. So any comments you've got on that would be great. So going into the substantive content of the report, one new risk has been added. This is CR8. We've used CR8 because it was a retired risk which has come back on, which is the inability to run an election/referendum. The details are in the report. Arguably, one of the biggest issues or risks within that category is the requirement through this election for photo ID for residents to give their vote. So the issues and the management of that process and how the council informs the public in the preceding lead up to that election is one of those key risks within that particular element. Risk CR17 has been temporarily retired. That is the reputation of place to the council for summer arrangements. That may or may not be resurrected as we go through to the summer. That would be a decision made in due course. Elsewhere, the other risks have all been updated in this report, and if you have got any detailed questions, I would quite like to call on the advice of the other officers in the room to help me out on those. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stannard. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Howell.
Yes, mine is in relation to CR20, which relates to the climate emergency declaration and measures in relation to it. That was one of the ones that we had a deeper dive into at a previous meeting, but it noted amongst other things that the director of environment, whatever I forget his title, but he said we had a choice between protecting the beaches, really. Well, essentially, he said we either have to lose past the cliffs or we have to lose the beaches, and it states that there's a detailed risk assessment coming forward in relation to this item, but our recent internal briefings were all cancelled on this subject. I understand there's been some issues in relation to staffing in this area, and yeah, I'd like to know, given it's such an important issue, when are we going to get a full and detailed risk assessment included in this section? Thank you.
Mr. Stannard, who would be best to answer that question?
I'll ask the chief executive after, but I can certainly take that one away. It's unlikely, I don't have the answer, I have to admit, on the night, but I can certainly go away and ensure that answer is provided to the committee outside of the meeting. Yes. If the chief exec doesn't have a comment to make here and now.
Well, I was going to take the same line actually, which is that perhaps I could welcome the Chief Executive to the Audit Governance meeting, but to say in terms of the sort of overall thrust of the question from Councillor Howell, Chief Executive, could you respond to it? And I'll take up Mr. Stannard on his offer to research the detail and come back to the committee. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'm not sure I quite followed the drift of Councillor Howell's overall piece, but certainly on the detail, we'll come back to him. I wonder if, in terms of the detail of the bit, could I speak to Councillor Howell offline outside of the meeting? Would that be more helpful for him and talk him through it? And we are actually trying to arrange a meeting about another issue. I wonder if I could cover the two with him outside of the meeting separately, but that would be helpful.
Well, if there are sensitive issues that really you'd rather take offline, then that would be fine. But I do think, you know, for the public record, you know, given it's such an important issue, we should have some form of timeline when this is envisaged to come forward.
I'm sorry, I lost the last part of the.
Yeah. So the first line of the risk assessment says a detailed risk assessment is being developed and agreed, but the information below represents a summary of the draft document. But there's very few detailed risks in there. I think there's two questions. Is what is that process that is, you know, how is it going to be developed and agreed, and what is the timescale for that? Because presumably that is scheduled to go through to cabinet at some point, and yeah, and you know, I think that's as much as I'm asking for today. Really, is to make sure that this is actually being addressed and it's not being compromised or subordinated to other priorities.
So I think, Chief Executive, it comes down to that kernel of issue. Could you respond to that one, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I gave a commitment that we brought more detail back to the same cycle, to the Audit and Governance Committee in the same cycle as it's going to go to Cabinet. Would that be a helpful commitment to give in terms of the timescale? That doesn't seem to be on.
That works in terms of our calendar of meetings in the forward plan.
Yeah.
And there's capacity. Certainly, I think it would be the case that we would have capacity in our two remaining meetings of this cycle of this council on the 16th of February and the 9th of March. And if that coincides in preparation for Cabinet, I'm sure Councillor Howell will find that a satisfactory outcome.
Okay, so
yeah,
certainly.
I'm still a little bit confused because and obviously what happens in terms of the broader report is going to feed through into the recommendation in the risk register. So the primary documentation is the reports that are being developed, presumably that are going to Cabinet and to come forward as some kind of recommendation report. Am I incorrect there? Is there no report in the process of development that is related to the risk register? Are they completely separate issues? But if there is a report, perhaps one of the democratic officers could say when in the forward plan it's scheduled to arrive at Cabinet and Council.
Well, that's the piece I don't know because I've got the Cabinet forward plan.
But we have a number of officers here that could look it up.
So I wonder, Chief Executive, just to follow through from what you said before, you've given that assurance anyway, but you're probably looking at the dates.
Yes, I'm happy to give that. I've just been trying to get the forward plan up to check the dates. I don't have that in front of me either. And my system is responding extremely slowly at the moment, so I'm struggling to get access to any other papers. So I'm not able to help with that. Has anybody from Dem Services, has anybody got access to the forward plan? Can you see it on there?
Well, perhaps whilst that's being looked for, I'll go to a question from another member, Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. It's in connection with CR8 and CR17. With CR8, this inability to run an election or referendum. I'm assuming that that's related to, I know it comes up every time there is an election, but with changes in regulations this time round, it's far more significant and far more of a risk than it has been in the past. I'm assuming that it revolves primarily around the requirement for voters to present ID and the way that ID is checked, which almost certainly is going to involve increased staffing at all the polling stations, and together with some of the regulations there which are going to relate to the requirement of shielded polling booths, mirrors and reflections and so on. So there is a significant financial impact on the councils. Is there any way in which the government is subsidising those financial risks for the council? And if not, I assume that they are being placed into the 23-24 budget with an increased expenditure for that particular service unit. That's the first item.
Will we perhaps deal with that one?
Yeah.
I'll come back to you on the other one, because the Chief Executive, as the returning officer, is obviously the proper officer to ask the question. So, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Very happy to respond on that one. The risk itself expresses a wider ranging risk than just that. I think the changing arrangements and the new arrangements that are being brought in do provide a focused risk, but actually the risk that we've tried to illustrate here goes beyond that. So, for example, if there were a general election called on the same date, and we don't think that is likely, but just in case it were, then clearly that would add to the risk in terms of getting the normal level of staffing. So the risk that we're monitoring here is much wider than just the new identification or identity challenges. Those identity challenges, we have been assured by government, will be fully funded from government. Of course, as with everything that comes with funding from government, we wait to see whether the cost actually equates to the income that we've got, but that's being dealt with through new burdens type funding, so we should get that fully funded from government. But there is a huge complexity in identity checking, particularly for for many individuals for whom they would not, for example, want to uncover their face in front of a male to have their identity checked. So the whole range of issues that come out of that, possibly because of the makeup of our community, less of an issue for us in terms of percentage of the population, but nonetheless we have to deal with every individual's requirements within that. So the requirements set by government are quite wide-ranging, as Councillor Brooke has suggested. We are assured by government that they will cover the cost of that. I wait to see whether that actually translates to covering the cost, but at the moment we're working on the basis that it will. But I think the point I want to make in response primarily is that actually this risk of running an election is much greater than just the additional risk with the ID. There are always risks around the election. That's why we bring this risk forward every time there is a major election, not for a single by-election, but for the all-out elections. Then we feel it is appropriate to bring it forward. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair, on that one. And then risk CR17 to do with the summer arrangements. I would have thought that should be staying on the risk register permanently, because it comes around year after year, and there is a risk of out of sight, out of mind in a way. And I'm just concerned that by taking it off the register, that gets overlooked. And would it not be better to keep it on the register?
Mr. Stannard?
I can assure Councillor Brooke that that's not the case. I think in other meetings we sometimes have the view that we're not dynamic enough and we don't take things on and off the register. By retiring it but keeping it in sight, that is the way we make sure that it doesn't drop out of sight, out of mind. So I can absolutely say that that won't be the case. We do have a process of making sure that isn't the case.
I won't go into what is that process. It'll delay us even more, but thank you for the assurances.
I was anticipating there would be a question on it. Discussed it with Mr. Stannard prior to the meeting. I think I'm satisfied that the way this has been set up will work. So going back to the previous question from Councillor Howell, I'm going to ask Mr. Hanton to reference the Cabinet forward plan and then maybe Chief Executive, you could come back after that, Mr. Hampton.
Thank you. I'm not wholly familiar with the Cabinet Corporate Plan, but I've just looked at the plan that went to the committee earlier this week. There's one item there on page 11, which relates to the strategy to protect coastal communities from tidal flooding and erosion risk, and that's highlighted for a decision on the 25th of October 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. Does that help, Chief Executive?
Yep, if I can come off mute, that certainly does. I was just also trying to find, we have a list of outstanding policies on harmonisation. I was just trying to check the date coincides with that. I think it is around that time. So I'm happy to confirm that we will find the most appropriate cycle of the Audit Committee and bring that item to here if that would help the committee, as part of the process of taking it through Cabinet.
Councillor Howell?
Yeah, thank you. I was really not satisfied by that. It appears that there is not a paper coming forward to Cabinet and Council in relation to the broader effects of climate change, which is presumably what this corporate risk item is related to at any time in the near future, if it's not on the forward plan, which I find quite disturbing, because we were assured that this work was urgent and ongoing by the director involved at our meeting looking at this item. So I'm somewhat at a loss to understand, where we are as a council in dealing with this enormously important issue.
Chief Executive?
Sorry, Chairman, my system has finally responded. There is also a policy document on climate and ecological emergency action plan, which is due. I've got that down on a separate list as being due for approval on March 23. So within the next 8 to 10 weeks. I don't know if Mr. Hampton can see that on the Cabinet forward plan, because I can't get into Modern Gov to get that out, I'm afraid.
No, we don't seem to be able to find it, Chief Executive. Could I suggest that perhaps once we've got to the depths of a solution, that perhaps an email could be circulated to update the committee on what is planned, and also what should, if anything, come through to Audit and Governance Committee over and above the risk strategy itself. I don't think we can take that any further this evening without delaying every other item on the agenda, really.
Yep.
So I'll leave that one with you, Chief Executive.
Very happy to commit to that, Chairman, and apologies for the delay in getting that information.
Thank you very much. Councillor Phipps.
Just a thought, really. Should we have a risk on there about the external audit not being completed? Because it is quite a risk now, by the sound of it. We've got a pause on it. We've no idea when it's going to happen. The 2020, 21, 20, and we've got the pause on the 21, 22. We've got quite risks there. A lot of risk there. Has anybody thought about putting that on there, or just a comment, really? I wondered what the thoughts might be on it.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt it's going to progress. It's just a question of the pace of progression, I suppose. Mr. Stannard, could you respond, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can certainly take it away to pose the question to Corporate Management Board. My gut feel is that you know, the purpose of a risk register is to you know, determine whether, you know, so it's in mind, in focus, whether we're going to treat it, how can we mitigate it. You know, it's an issue rather than a risk, arguably. You know, we would have to articulate what risks are hitting the council as a result of the audit. So I think it's certainly something to discuss, but I'm not sure the issue itself of the simple fact that we're not getting the accounts signed off on time is you know, we'd have to articulate it in a certain way.
I think my point remains that there isn't a risk of it not occurring. It is just a question of when it's going to occur, and it's clear, isn't it, from this meeting and previous meetings, that we are completely on top of the challenge that's being presented to us as a council over both audits and the timing of the next value for money judgment. So all three of those are very much in mind and are progressing, but not as quickly as any of us would like.
Yeah, okay, I'll accept that. It just seems that I understand we're on top of the challenge, that we're on the case, but some of it is actually out of our hands in a way, because it's not happening. And I just wonder what the risk might be. Anyway, I'll put it out there. I'll leave it at that.
It is there, and of course take comfort from the fact that meeting by meeting that is recorded in the minutes as well. So there's a point of reference on each occasion. It isn't as though it's left there and we reinvent it every time we have a meeting. Those minutes, and from my own point of view, and no doubt from the committee, are very, very important in this respect. We don't want to have been found to be wanting in terms of progressing this, and I know we wouldn't be, but we've had that recorded, which I think is the important part of it. But I'll leave that with Mr. Stannard and the Corporate Management Board in case there's a divergence of opinion, and no doubt Mr. Stannard will be able to come back to us if that's necessary by email between meetings. Councillor Howell?
Yeah, just on that, I mean, the Grant Thornton representative did say that it needed to start by sometime in June. So it'd be useful to know why it needed to start by then. Or presumably it needs to finish by a certain date. So why, if it doesn't need to finish by a certain date, why did we say it needs to start by
because what he indicated, and he didn't give a firm assurance, what he indicated was that that was his expectation of what they might be able to achieve. And that's what the conversation last week that was taking place was trying to get to. And so I'm satisfied out of that he has put on record that is Grant Thornton's position. But of course it will be updated according to his own resources, his staffing, and so on.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
That's how far we've taken it anyway. So members, Councillor Cox, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, and it was just about the what Margaret was just talking about. I have to say I disagree. I think there is a risk which should be acknowledged, because if we don't get the audit done, then there could be consequences. Oh, I believe there could be consequences, not least to the reputation of BCP. We've already had the 2021 audit delayed by an extraordinary amount of time, and now we're faced not for any reasons that that are necessarily in our control, although I suppose we could start by sacking Grant Thornton, but we can, we should, there are risks. If only the reputation of BCP, this as Councillor Filer has already explained, that this is not going to look good in any field, and therefore I feel personally that this should be highlighted as a risk. That's my opinion.
Well, I've taken the advice of Mr. Stannard and conveyed that to the committee, and we've all heard what Mr. Barber had to say as far as Grant Thornton's concerned. I don't see actually any practical benefit to highlighting this as a risk over and above the other measures that we're taking and the way we're recording this judiciously, meeting by meeting. I'm sure you'll take an opposing view to that, Councillor Cox, but we can only do what we can do. And it's not as though in the substantive part of the 2020-21 audit that it's not as though we are on our own. That is happening to many, many other authorities, and most upper tier authorities in particular. Indeed, the fact that the audit manager needs now to be replaced is a very recent development, and it's one that I hope for the 2021-22 audit will be satisfied relatively soon, and Mr. Barber has given that assurance and an indicative date. So I don't know that we can take it a lot further, and whether a further risk will actually help move that forward. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. This should be just a quick one, and mainly to confirm an assumption that I hope is there. It's regarding risk CR19. Shockingly, it's about planning, which obviously I see from a different point of view in my roles and other committees. But mainly to highlight a concern that I hope is already seen there, that the middle percentage that of minor planning applications is lower, and as such much closer to that government intervention level than the others. And despite the clearly very good trend upwards, it is a little concerning that major applications are seeing a much better completion rate than minors. And my assumption would be that that's due to the overturn of more junior planning officers, the high turnover that we do see and are already aware of, because those won't be handling the major applications. But I do want to make sure that is something that is looked at and considered on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Mr. Stannard.
I can test Councillor Johnson's hypothesis with the service and respond by email, copying the whole committee in, if that's appropriate.
Is that satisfactory, Councillor Johnson? I think that'd be very helpful, Mr. Stannard. So, members, could I perhaps now take us to the recommendation, which is again a noting recommendation, that members of the Audit and Governance Committee note the update provided in this report relating to corporate risks. Can we say note, members? Thank you all very much indeed. We're running a little bit behind time, but for good reasons, I'm sure. So that takes us on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the annual governance statement 2021-22 and the action plan and update. And I'll ask Mr. Stannard, Head of Audit and Management Assurance, to introduce the report. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report is the action plan update and also update on wider annual governance issues. So the update is for the 21-22 annual governance statement, which this committee considered back in July 22 and approved the draft. So the first part of this report in the tables highlights the actions. I'm not going to add lots to the content of the report. I'm going to concentrate mainly on the governance with external bodies on the basis that there's an awful lot of other assurance on the children's social services governance issues, and we've also heard about the delay in the completion of the account, so number 3 on the list. So I'm going to concentrate on the parks for the first part. So with regard to parks, charities and trusts, the relationship between the council and the Parks Foundation has been subject to good scrutiny, and a legal review has happened, which has resulted in several new documents being drafted back and forth between the Parks Foundation and the council, and they're now at a point where they're going to be formally approved. Elsewhere, the wider parks governance arrangements are being reviewed by a senior internal legal colleague, and they are set to report and make some recommendations by the 31st of March this year. And the information is laid out in the report. And finally, on partnerships, the more general corporate arrangements, all those draft documents that that we articulated in the action plan, they've all now been completed in draft. They're about to go through the corporate management board scrutiny, challenge, and then they will be adopted prior to the 31st of March as agreed in the action plan. So if everything happens as we hope, there is a fairly good chance that the governance of external bodies can come off the governance statement for next year. But I appreciate there's a few ifs and buts before that has to take place. So the second element of this report then goes into the area that we have to take into account. The key paragraph is paragraph 7 of the report, and we have to take into account issues that we become aware of right up to the point that the annual governance statement is signed off by the auditors. So with this regard, we've got two key issues that we've considered since we last looked at this in July, those being the public inspection and the financial sustainability issues raised by Grant Thornton. So whilst these are undoubtedly issues for some people, depending on your point of view, they are not, in the view of the Statutory Officers Group, issues caused by bad governance or weaknesses in governance. So the AGs won't be adjusted for those issues, but I'm sure members will have questions on that, so I'm not going to go further into that at this stage, and I'll respond to questions. Over to questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stannard. Members, questions? Councillor Phipps.
Well, yeah, it is on basically page 1418, a response to the public inspection of the accounts. There's some issues here that are of quite high significance in my view, and as I did say before, I mentioned even to the auditor on the previous item, things just seem to get, in my view, brushed aside. Oh, well, yeah, that's all right. Oh, well, we'll just have a look at that. Oh, there's probably some mitigation or something. There are some items here that, in my view, are very, very serious as far as governance of this council is concerned. One of them, absolutely, is the abolition of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. I mean, look what's happened. Some items don't even get scrutinised anymore. One of them being a recent 5-year plan for beach hut rents, which was coming before council the other night. I mean, absolutely astonishing that this sort of thing has just kind of been put, oh, well, yeah, we've had a look at that, that's all right. Yet again, we've got on here the awarding of the ARG grants. I've got so much stuff on that, and I'm sure that has come forward already, and I know it has, to the auditor and to financial officer, the monitoring officer. There are, in my view, clear governance issues with that, absolutely clear in my view, and it's just been brushed aside. The Bayside, there's another one. Nothing, obviously that's not on here, but I'm quite aghast really as to why these, in my view, don't appear to have been taken seriously, some of these issues. It's a case of, oh yeah, we had a look at it. Yes, we had a presentation to Audit and Governance. You could ask some questions. We looked at this, we looked at that. Oh, no problem there. Nothing to see here. And that's how I see it. And these are items, a lot of these, of extreme public interest. They've been all over the press. And still, and I just think that residents are just being ignored, basically, on some of these issues. I think I'd better leave it there at the moment, and there's probably issues on financial sustainability as well, but I'm not happy at all with the outcomes that are here in this report.
Well, thank you for stating your views, Councillor Phipps. I don't think that it's necessarily at the door of audit and governance that you should be pinpointing any shortcomings. So I will ask Mr. Stannard to comment.
I think, Chair, the only thing I can say is that, you know, this is about governance weaknesses and significant governance issues, and you know, what we're talking about here is governance and weaknesses that, you know, so there's a difference between the council's processes have been followed, policies have been followed, you know, there's issues of decision making and it's not a governance matter. We followed the governance processes.
We have to agree to disagree on some of this. I've made my point, I think. Thank you.
Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. It's really along very, very similar lines. I'm looking at paragraph 8.2, in which it makes that we had information earlier on tonight and in a previous email. Identified weaknesses in the Council's financial sustainability arrangements and key recommendations were made. The weaknesses identified were not of a governance nature, and the same report concluded there were no identified significant governance weaknesses identified. I'm a little bit concerned about that for a number of reasons. One is I think they are governance issues. Decision making is not separate from governance, and decision making and governance are not separated from scrutiny. And one of the points that I made at a full council meeting early on with the budget was that because of all the risks that were involved, there was actually a need for greater scrutiny, and proposed an amendment for having the scrutiny of the MTFP and budget processes every month now, as opposed to quarterly. But what we saw was that was rejected, and with the abolition of the scrutiny board, the MTFP has basically only gone to cabinet with very little scrutiny, and very recently the government have insisted that things should be looked at monthly. So there's been a big mistake made through the council's way it was voted, and it should have had that scrutiny in place, and that scrutiny is part of governance. And as a result, we are now in this position, whereas nearly a year ago, the issues could have been raised and looked at in more detail, and perhaps some of the problems we've got avoided. Though from a political point of view, I doubt if that's the case, but I can imagine that it should have been. So I've got real concerns that we've got a statement here that's saying things are not to do with governance, when in fact they are to do with governance. I don't know, Nigel Stannard can't come back and say, well, it's not, because he's already done that. And I'm just saying that I disagree with him, and I have real concerns that intimate that things are going through and we're expected to know things and accept what we're told to note when there are governance issues. And I'm sure Adam may well want to come back on this.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Well, I'll go first to Mr. Stannard, who may well wish to refer to Mr. Richards. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Brooke. What I was trying to get across is in the Grant Thornton report, they raise issues of financial sustainability, but in the same report, they say those issues are not as a result of the council's poor governance or weaknesses in governance. And that was the point, that this paragraph in the report and the decision of the statutory officers around why financial sustainability shouldn't appear as a significant governance issue.
Mr. Richards.
I was going to reiterate something very similar, but also just to pick up on a point of detail in the sense that I think you said that the government insisted that we do monthly financial reporting during the latter part of last calendar year as a result of our application, I think, to the Exceptional Financial Support Programme. Well, actually, it was a decision of Cabinet to do that. The government didn't insist on monthly reporting. What government insisted on is that we balance the budget by the end of September, which was the October Cabinet report, and we communicate that to them. And that's what we did. The actual monthly reporting thereafter was a decision of Cabinet.
Councillor Brooke.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm sorry if I
could you speak to the
yeah,
microphone?
sorry, I will. I've got my information slightly wrong, but it does confirm that actually it should have been supported in the first instance and not wait till we're in the mess that we're in now. And consequently, as I say, that has been and is a governance issue.
I well understand the frustration that's being expressed by some members, but I will fight the corner of audit and governance not to lay the responsibility at this committee. I think it's really important that we're clear about that. And if there are other things that need to be done, other strategies that need to be adopted, I'm not absolutely sure that these arguments are for this committee. I'm not sure whether there's anything that the officers wish to add at this stage. I've declined from calling in the Chief Executive into this question, although he's obviously free to speak if he would like to. But I do understand the frustration. I'm not sure that here is the right place for it to be concluded. You want to come back, Councillor?
Just very, very briefly, Chair. I'm not criticising this committee at all. I'm just saying that I don't accept that there were no governance issues involved, and consequently there is a need for us to look as a committee at how that situation can be avoided in the future.
And did you have an idea of timescale on that?
I don't, but it will be after my time.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. What I won't allow, as members of this committee will know, and I'm sure we would all fundamentally agree, I will not allow this committee to end up in a politicised position. We never have done, and I'm anxious that we maintain that. And I'm not sure that would be helpful before the date of the next local elections. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Brooke. I think it is perhaps an issue that needs to be addressed by the next council after the local elections, but probably not by this committee before then. Councillor Howell.
Well, yeah, I was just following on for that, for my interest as a relatively new member of the committee and of public interest. I mean, it seems to me that the Grant Thornton's approach into governance is that they identify a problem and then kind of reverse engineer it and say, was there a governance issue in relation to that problem? And then if there wasn't, then that's fine, if you see what I mean. Or not necessarily identify a problem, look at a decision, and if it's all, they only look at the big decisions, and if there's not a governance issue that they've identified in relation to that big decision, everything is okay, rather than looking at the governance position as a whole, which might reveal, if one looks at some of the smaller decisions financially, some issues. So my question is it actually a responsibility of the auditors to assess the overall health of the governance structure and its actually implementation? Is there another body or process that does that, or is it really just up to the council itself, to manage that process of governance? Thank you.
Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, I can absolutely catch it. It's one of the three core strands of the value for money opinion of Grant Thornton. Governance is one of those three: financial sustainability, governance, and the other one being, I can't remember off the top of my head. Adam, can you remember the third one? Yeah, it's 3 years. Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, so Grant Thornton absolutely look at the council's governance arrangements, and they've made that view within their financial system. You know, they've identified financial sustainability issues, but they have said categorically in their report that they don't perceive that those issues are of a governance making.
Yeah, if I may come back, I mean, I'm sure in previous meetings that they have suggested that, you know, they only look at the big issues and in relation to governance, and rather than carrying out, you know, a general review of governance, which might involve them looking at, you know, concerns in relation to less financially, well, smaller financial projects. Which I would suggest is a deficiency in their review, and maybe something that ought to contribute in addition to other things raised this evening as to whether they should continue to be our auditors. Thank you.
Well, that's a provocative statement to make, Councillor Howell, and I don't think it's something that's...
It's not, it's just a number, it's just a fact. So
no,
surely we consider...
I don't really want to... I don't want this committee to go down that route. It would be wholly inappropriate and certainly right at the moment. But what you could do is to ask the first part of that question of Grant Thornton at our next meeting, when they will be present on the 16th of February. And that might be the more appropriate way, rather than dealing with Grant Thornton in the third person and absent from the room. I think that would be the right way to deal with it.
Yes, thank you. I'll take up that suggestion.
Thank you. But I would stop you in your tracks from the chair if you venture into the last part of your statement.
Yeah, I would just like to make it clear, I wasn't suggesting that they should be removed. What I said is
I don't want to pursue that line at all.
Consideration in what is presumably the annual process of reappointment. Thank you.
Mr. Stannard.
I've noticed online that Pete Barber has turned his camera on, so I just wonder whether he did want to come in at that point, or whether...
Well, he hasn't indicated, which is why I haven't gone back to them. I'm not sure I really want to prolong this debate given the hour, but unless Mr. Barber indicates that he wants to, which he now has, Mr. Barber.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think it's probably helpful just to make a couple of observations. So this is the annual governance statement for 21-22. So we just need to remember that the VFM report presented in October referred to arrangements in place for the previous year. So this is about the council making their own assessment of the arrangements that exist in place, the governance arrangements in place within the council, and whether in their view there are any weaknesses that require specific attention within an annual statement. And I note Mr. Stannard's observation about our role, but I think it's important to comment that governance assurance is obtained from a large range of sources at any council, including, interestingly, internal audit, where internal audit will design a series of audit work, you know, with a focus on three main areas: internal control, risk management, and governance. Similarly, as mentioned by Mr. Stannard, our VFM work covers governance, but only within the defined criteria set out in the NAO code on specific areas detailed within that document. Similarly, this committee itself is charged with governance and should seek to bring in different aspects of the council where appropriate to gain assurance over the governance arrangements in place. So, you know, once again, I think that with this particular document, you need to have regard to the year in which it relates to, rather than the references particularly back to our report last year, recognising that that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a continued issue in one or more of the BFM areas going forward. But clearly we will be reaching that view when we come to report our BFM findings for 21-22 later this year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barber. Can I now go to Councillor Cox?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. When he stated it's about governance, that it is about governance. This is what this committee is in its title, governance. And from what I've seen so far is that some people treat governance as a tick box operation, and this is where I fundamentally disagreed with Mr. Barber from Grant Thornton when he reported on his governance. Then I welcomed his statement on financial sustainability. It was a frank and honest opinion, but I did not agree with his statements or his opinions on the governance of this council, because in my opinion it is lacking fundamentally in a number of areas, and therefore we as a committee need to do, in my opinion, we need to deal with that. And it shouldn't be a tick box operation. There are a number of areas, and the numbers that are even been highlighted here have grown and grown since we started. There was virtually nothing at the beginning, when I first started, but now we've got half a dozen, if not more. And there's the stuff the stuff, in my opinion, which to do with governance is not here. I mean, the KPMG report, it's not there. The fact is that some of us, at least anyway, believe the council broke the law and contravened its own constitution. That is certainly an opinion of many people, and that's nowhere to be seen. And the fact that there's a massive conflict of interest with the leader, which has been highlighted again and again and again, it's not seen as a governance issue. Well, in my opinion, it is a governance issue. It's the reason that we're in such a financial mess that we're in at the moment is because of that, because there's not enough financial governance in BCP to strengthen where we are, and I think that's wrong. And so I do think that we should not treat governance as a tick box operation. It has to be something stronger than that. And unfortunately, I do feel as though at the moment we are treating it as a tick box operation, which is sad.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm conscious of the need not to extend the debate further. I just wanted to express a concern that I think there is some conflation between failures of governance and disagreement about ways of taking things forward and doing things that aren't necessarily a failure of governance, but other councils might have exercised a different form of governance within the rules. So I just wanted to make the point, I don't think we have seen a breach of any of the rules. And if councillors genuinely believe that, what I was going to suggest was I would be very happy to receive those and to meet with those councillors that believe there has been a failure of governance, because, frankly, I will not allow a failure of governance. So if there are those suggestions, I'd like to hear those, go through those with the councillor, and then have a look at those outside, because, we have values like we have integrity. I want to believe that the council actually does what it says it will do through the constitution. Whether there is disagreement about the way the constitution operates or different suggestions about that might be the issue, but I would much rather sit down with those councillors and go through the issues if that would help to take the debate forward tonight, and then to bring back any issues that arise from that.
Thank you very much.
That's a helpful suggestion.
I welcome that initiative, because what I do not want to see happen, and I've given members, particularly the last member who spoke, considerable latitude in what they've said. I don't think that this is the appropriate forum for airing the issues in the way they have been aired, and I welcome, Chief Executive, you taking this on in the way that you've indicated, and perhaps keeping in touch with me as chairman of the committee as to where that has gone and what the issues are and what your conclusions are, because I think it's important that I'm aware of that, and then we can judge whether there is further work for this committee to do or not, or whether actually we've discharged our obligations completely satisfactorily, which is what I believe we have. Thank you very much for that, Chief Executive. Councillor Filer.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've sat on this committee for a long time, and I really object to the politicising of this committee. We've always been apolitical. We're allowed to have opinions, we're allowed to disagree, but statements that Councillor Cox has just made, breaking the law, bad governance, it's entirely politicising a committee which has. Councillor Cox shakes his head. Of course it is. As far as I'm aware, no one's broken the law. You can have your opinion. My opinion is that the law has not been broken. The Chief Executive's here. I'm sure he knows whether or not the law has been broken. And I object to that. It's taking this committee in a direction that it's never gone before. Good debate, which we've had so far, and deep debate is great. And it's what we need to have, because just agreeing to everything, but starting bringing political opinions into it is not great. And I really object. That's it.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to get to the recommendations. I have been back to you, Councillor Howell, and I would remind you that we're 2 hours into this meeting and we've still got a number of issues. No, please let me finish. Please let me finish. That we still have a number of items that require our attention and diligence to conclude as well. I'll let you come back very briefly, but please no long statements.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that perhaps some of the problem here is that, and I speak as a lawyer who would, in most cases in my ordinary life, not tread on the toes of accountants, that actually a lot of this is more of a legal issue than an accounting issue. In terms of governance, and we obviously as a committee, you know, have been through the constitution process, and that has its own problems. But there doesn't seem to be a mechanism where we, as a committee, certainly I haven't come across it in my time here, where we look at what is best practice in terms of how councils operate their governance procedures. And it's kind of left for this strange, murky process. Murky not in a dodgy kind of way, but just opaque. You know, sometimes we arrive at a way of doing things through the Constitution, which is, you know, many, and we end up on the night in council discussing specific clauses of the Constitution in a way which is satisfactory. I think most of us find unsatisfactory. You know, it seems that we're missing a layer of overview there, where we should be looking at best practice elsewhere as to how we should be running our committees and approval processes, etc. And I'd welcome your comments on that, Chair, as to whether that is a regular theme that is returned to in the cycle, or whether that's something we should be adding in. Thank you.
Well, we went to I think, quite extraordinary lengths actually to compare our proposals around the Constitution with those adopted by other local authorities. We did that starting before the formation of BCP Council and have carried on doing so. And I know that Ms Zeiss has had quite a lot of input into that work. So it isn't true to say that we haven't consulted or looked at other constitutions to see if we can end up with best practice coming out of them. In a hung council, there are going to be such frustrations. I fully accept and acknowledge that, but it isn't the job of this committee to allow itself to get into the political territory. And as Councillor Filer has said, we've managed not to do that for 3.5 years. And I'm absolutely certain we're not going to descend into allowing, you know, in a public meeting, airtime to people to insinuate political agendas, whatever those may be. I have no interest in them as far as audit and governance is concerned at all. And I'm absolutely determined that we won't do that. So yes, your point is correct around finding best practice from other authorities, particularly unitaries and large unitaries at that. We have done that progressively over time. I've no doubt as our constitution evolves, as every constitution does, we will continue to do that. And if we need to have help and support from the LGA, for example, we'll go down that route too. We want the best and most workable constitution for this council for the long term, amended as it needs to be amended. And we'll carry on doing that, I am sure. Our successors as councillors will insist on it too, because otherwise we can't have the kind of constitution that's going to deliver what we need. But these issues around a hung council are always going to be there to the fore, and we're experiencing that at the moment. I think that would be my response. Ms Seiss, and I do really want to move on after that. Ms Seiss?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to add that before we did the last major rework of the Constitution, we did seek the advice of the Local Government Association about which other constitutions they felt represented best practice, and it was the Cornwall Unitary Constitution that formed the basis of some of our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually omitted the piece about Cornwall. You're absolutely right, and thank you for reminding all of us about it. If it is really quick.
It is very quick, and I think Adam could probably answer. There was a consultation with residents 18th of November till 23rd of December on the 2023 budget. How many responses did you get? Was that quick enough?
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Phipps.
Very quick answer. The full details of that will be announced as part of the second budget cafe, which has been set up for next Wednesday. So all the details. So there'll be a separate, as part of that, one element of it will be the feedback from that consultation.
Members, can we now move on to the three recommendations, which are all for noting. So I will read all of them out for the public record. Recommended the Audit and Governance Committee note: A, the progress made to address the significant governance issues on the BCP Council AGS Action Plan 2021-22 and the opportunities for further improvement in line with the Financial Management Code. B, to note that the wording in the AGS 2020-21 statement for the delay in the completion of the 2020-21 external audit has been slightly amended to include the delay caused by receiving required confirmation from the auditor of the Dorset Pension Fund, and C, the feedback from the public inspection period and other potential significant governance issues which may have arisen since the publication of the draft have been considered, and that no amendment to the AGS 2021-22 has been made. Members, can we agree to note those three paragraphs? Thank you very much indeed. Could I now perhaps move us on to item 10 on the agenda, which is the Assurance Framework and Internal Audit Planning Consultation 2023-24, and that is again for Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chairman. The Public Sector Internal Audit Standards requires the relevant board or committee to approve a risk-based audit plan and an audit charter on an annual basis. This committee is the relevant committee for BCP Council, and this will be done at our last meeting prior to the local elections on the 9th of March. Prior to that meeting, it's good practice for the committee to be consulted on the high-level strategic approach and the framework, so that I can incorporate any comments into the plan and charter. So turning firstly to the assurance framework, which is Appendix 1 in your pack, this is the skeleton, if you like, in which we hang the detailed audit plan off. It shows the significant or key assurance functions the council has in place and which internal audit will consider to determine the adequacy of our systems, our controls and our operational arrangements. And ultimately, of course, that's to ensure that they all contribute to help us achieving the council's objectives and stated outcomes. So then turning to the high-level internal audit resource allocation on pages 148 and 149, one of my responsibilities is to ensure that sufficient resource is available to provide a suitably robust overall annual audit opinion based on all the work undertaken. At this stage, of course, the 23-24 budget is not finalised or approved, but providing the budget will be broadly similar and that's the planning assumptions that I've made in the tables of this report, and it's also the assumptions made in the draft budget and MTFP work that other committees have received. But I can give you that assurance that resources will be sufficient to undertake all that. Flexibility, of course, will be the key as the council continues its transformation journey. So this table is indicative rather than hard and fast. So, you know, some of those numbers are going to change. Of course they will between now and implementation. The plan that you agree in March will be much more detailed. So I'll bring that forward in March, as I say. Over to questions, Chair, through you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stannard. I'm pleased to hear you focus as well on the resource issue, because that is a question that, as you know, I always pose, that you have sufficient resources to discharge your responsibilities, not just with this actually, but in other areas of the internal audit work. Members, questions? Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Looking through pages 148, 149, I accept Mr. Stannard's assurances that he can cope, but 60 days is a significant number of days. It's effectively 2 months of work that is being cut from the internal audit and governance. And that does actually give me a certain amount of concern. What I am pleased to see is that there's no reduction in the planned days for some of those high level and financial issues that will be looked into. So it's really a question of where those lost days actually fall. And I would just like an assurance that where you've got the training element, for instance, and vacancy contingency. And vacancies is a big issue for us right across the board, where we've got a reduction of 40 days. Is going to be they're still going to be effective in terms of the audit. So is there an alternative distribution of days that might improve the programme from what it is? I mean, I've said I accept the assurances, but it may just be that there's an alternative way that could actually make the assurances even stronger.
No, I completely understand your point, and they're really good and precise questions. Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, it surprised me actually when we were doing the numbers for the new financial year. There's a couple of quirks in this. So obviously, you know, as part of the local government pay settlement, there's an extra day's leave for most employees. So that's a factor for less productive days. And also the way just simply the calendar works, there's actually 3 less working days in the 23-24 financial year because of the way weekends fall. So there's just, and obviously spread over 13 staff, that's, you know, 30 days, nearly, well, 28 days. But so Councillor Brooks right, you know, this is indicative. These numbers are going to change. They're a flavour. You know, the vacancy contingency Councillor Brooke mentioned, I've taken that completely out because I think that was a sort of double whammy, you know, sort of comfort blanket, if you like, that I had in the plan. This year we've just been managing that through the you know, the movements on other lines, so it was an unnecessary you know, comfort blanket in the plan, if you like. So yeah, but I do hear what Councillor Brooks says, and you know, it is a moving feast. I've learned that this year, and we're constantly tweaking this as we go.
So does that help to satisfy you, Councillor Brooks? Yeah, and I'm confident that if Mr. Stannard was hitting difficult times in one way or another, and it isn't just about resource, it's about recruitment and all that goes with that. that he would want to report that back to us as a committee, even if it was out of cycle to do it. I think that would be correct, wouldn't it, Mr. Stannard?
Absolutely, Chair.
I mean, I wouldn't want him just to brief me as chairman and not actually share that with the committee, because it's important this committee is aware of what's going on and what it can do to help to alleviate those issues if necessary. Members, any other questions? Don't think anybody's indicated who is not present either. In that case, could I perhaps go to the recommendations? And it's recommended that Audit and Governance Committee A, agree the BCP assurance framework, and B, provide any comments or feedback on the proposed draft 23-24 internal audit plan, high level allocation of resources and delivery approach. So I think I'll just ask the committee, can we agree those two recommendations? We've, I hope, discharged the second one, particularly through what Councillor Brooke had to say a moment ago. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. Takes us on to item 11, which is the internal audit quarterly audit plan update. And again, it's Mr. Stannard, Head of Audit and Management Assurance. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. So this report summarises the quarter 3 22-23 end position. The overall takeaway is the audit plan continues to progress well. I hope you find the new table at paragraph 3 useful. We talked about this at our last meeting, and the new audit scope column gives a bit more detail of what each individual audit covered, rather than just the heading that you had before. So of the 11 audits that were completed in the quarter, 10 had a reasonable assurance opinion, and one audit, which was the education alternative provision, was a partial audit opinion. Paragraph 4, as per our agreed audit charter, goes into a bit more detail on what those issues were on that partial audit opinion. I spoke to the Corporate Director for Children's Services yesterday, and she has asked me to point out that the recommendations agreed from the audit are embedded within the wider improvement plan she is managing in Children's Services. So that will maintain a strong focus and strong corporate grip to ensure that they're implemented. The two further tables at paragraph 5 show we have a busy but achievable last quarter of 23-24. And then finally, Chair, I'd just like to draw members' attention to paragraphs 6 and 7, where internal audit have conducted a quick walkthrough review of the council's approach to special severance payments and compared this to the statutory guidance that came into force on May 22. We've concluded that BCP complies with that guidance, but we have made a couple of operational enhancements in the report. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stannard. Members, questions? No questions? Are there any questions for those members who aren't in the room?
No.
No. In that case, the recommendation is for noting, and that is that Audit and Governance Committee note the progress made and the issues arising on the delivery of the 2022-23 internal audit plan. Members, can we note the report, please? Thank you very much indeed. That takes us on to the final item on the agenda, which is item 12, a refresh of the forward plan, which we've referred to a couple of times this evening in terms of the two remaining dates of this committee within this council cycle and the external audit issues, which will need to remain flexible according to what comes back to us. But Mr. Stannard, could I ask you to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. If we go straight to the appendix and the shaded column first of all, just quickly review what we're likely to look at our February meeting. Unlikely, I would say now, to consider any statement of accounts issues. So that's more likely to flow into the March meeting. We've got our annual evolution of policies associated, terms of reference of this committee. So things like the whistleblowing and anti-fraud, they'll all come forward. And then also the financial regs evolution, which then has to go on to council because it's part of the constitution. So that will go to the 21st of March council meeting once this committee's approved that. And I have to own up to a mistake where I haven't liaised with Democratic on the Constitutional Review Working Party is obviously meeting next week, I think, and the outcome of that committee's work will need to either be on the February or March meeting, and I'll liaise with Democratic to see which meeting that best fits. Sorry, yeah, next week but one.
So the Constitutional Review Working Group meets on the 24th of January. And obviously, if we can't get any recommendations from there through to recommendations from Audit and Governance in time for Council on the 21st of March, any of that work will be lost. And so therefore, it's imperative that we either do it in the February or the March meeting so that those recommendations can go forward for Council on the 21st of March, and that's the reason for the relative pressure to get that done. And I'm sure that the chair of the review group will take that on board, Vice Chairman. Yeah. Thank you. So any questions or comments on the forward plan, members? No? In that case, can we approve the forward plan as set out in Appendix A, which that being the one recommendation that is on this report? Can I just go for a show of hands on approval of the forward plan, members? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. That is the final item on the agenda. Could I thank members for attending and staying the course tonight, and both those in the room and online, and indeed the officers both here and online as well, and particularly the Chief Executive, who I've had to call on a few times this evening. Thank you for your inputs also. And I therefore close this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee at 8:17. Thank you all.